I am from West Virginia. I'm Irish, I'm not Hispanic at all, but I fell in love with the Spanish language the first time I heard it, and so I've studied in Mexico, Cuba, and Costa Rica. I became a teacher kind of by accident. I really wanted to be an interpreter, so I was doing my master's degree in Spanish at West Virginia University, and to pay for school, I was a graduate teaching assistant, and that means I got to teach 2 classes each semester, and I just absolutely fell in love. I still interpreted when I graduated for about 6 months and then went back to teaching because I really found that I had a passion for it. So for me, being a teacher means that I get to work with people every day, and teaching at a community college means I get to work with a really diverse population. I really enjoy that. As a teacher, according to my students, I'm very enthusiastic, and according to them at 8 o'clock, too enthusiastic. I really like my subject matter. I enjoy Spanish. I think what makes me a good teacher is that I really enjoy working with the public, and my students would say that I'm very approachable. And teaching foreign language, you really need to be approachable because sometimes that can be an intimidating subject matter. Hearing my students speak Spanish gives me a lot of joy. When they come to me and say, I can't speak Spanish, I took it in high school, I can't do it, it's the moment when they realize they can do it is amazing. When I think about preparing students to succeed in life and not just to succeed in the Spanish classroom, I try to run my classroom like I would a business and make sure that they understand not just how to speak the language, but how to behave themselves, how to be on time, and I just like to set a high standard for them so that when they go out to get jobs, they're ready for that. I have 2 very memorable moments in teaching. The first would be the very first class I ever taught. There was a screen projector a screen I needed to pull down to use the projector, and I stood on a chair, and it was a rolly chair, and I fell off. And that was my very first day teaching. So that's memorable, not necessarily in a good way, but it was the first time that my students in the first day, they saw me as a person, and we laughed about it and moved on. And so I've always tried to keep that sense of, I'm just one of you guys. The second would be leading short-term studies abroad with students to Costa Rica. That's very memorable because I got to see the students grow a lot in a very short period of time.
Being a teacher means that I get to see the potential in these kids every day, and I get to see them become who they're going to be. And that process of helping them become is so incredibly meaningful to me. Sometimes the students will say, Mrs. Acton, why are you so joyful when you come to class? And it's because I get to be a part of a process that is a gift. There's a moment when a student's eyes just light up. And when I see that happen, I think it is the most wonderful reward to me. And the most satisfying experience that I have had so far is when I have a student who their eyes just glow and they say, oh my gosh, I get it, and they understand. And whatever it takes to get them there, sometimes it's dancing, singing, game playing, rapping, whatever it takes is worth it, because then all of a sudden you see the lights come on and they understand something that prior to that moment they were very frustrated. Something about myself that you may not know is that I love to dance. I have various certifications in many different types of dancing, and on our free time at home as a family, we will often have dance parties together, and to my husband's chagrin, I try to get all of us to dance as often as possible. I would say there's a moment that stands out for me as a highlight when I had a student tell me, this was years ago, I had a student tell me that they knew they were going to go into the Air Force Academy and they knew they were going to be a chemical engineer. And it was just one of those days. We were teaching and doing a lab, and we were talking about some kind of equation, and he looked up at me and he said, "I know what I'm gonna do. I know what I'm gonna do, Mrs. Acton." And I just remember feeling this moment, just going, "I'm a good teacher." And it wasn't an arrogant thing. It was just a moment in my heart that, solidified for me, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing with all your heart, I don't think there's a better feeling than that. And that's what I feel every day when I get to teach. And with that student telling me, this is what I want to be, that's what gets me up every day. That's what gets me fired up to come to school and to teach them, is that moment might happen when a student will say, "I know what I want to do with my life," or "I know what I want to be," or "I find this fascinating." And you never know when that's going to happen.
I grew up in Spain, and English was a second language for me. It was a foreign language. I always enjoy kind of listening to music, but I couldn't figure out what they were saying. So that was very interesting for me growing up, trying to figure out what other people were saying in a different language. So when I went to high school and I started knowing a little bit more English, my teachers there really inspired me to move on and keep on learning. And then once I got a little bit better, I decided that that's what I wanted to do when I grew up. Being a teacher means that I get involved in the life of lots of children during the day. It means that I can see them grow and learn. I get very attached to them because some of them I have been working with them since kindergarten. So I create lots of relationships between them and me and their families. I get to know them really well. So that's the best part of teaching to me, those relationships between their parents, their families, the kids, and also the rest of the teachers at school. Well, the most important thing that I think my students need to succeed in the real world is to have a good grasp of the English language in all their ways. Like, they need to be able to understand it, they need to be able to speak it, but they also need to be able to read it and write it correctly, because they're going to need it in the world later on when they go to work. And so I think that's the best thing I can do for them, help them prepare for the real world by improving their English skills as they move along in school. What I like to see the most is, and it brings me a lot of joy, is when children that I have taught in elementary school come back to this school because they want to volunteer or they want to tutor, and they're doing well. They're in high school and they're successful, and they want to share their success with other people. And so it makes me really proud of them to see that they're able to do that. A few years ago, one of my students came in 5th grade. She came straight from Mexico. She didn't speak any English, and she came towards the middle of the year. She definitely stands up on my mind because she made such an incredible growth just in the end, like the very end of the year that I had her, and then she went on to middle school. I kind of kept tabs on her just to see how she was doing. She did really, really well, and what it was the best thing was last year we were looking for a part-time translator here at Garrett, and she came and she interviewed for that position. So, I was very proud of her because not only she had graduated from Eastern and she was really, really well prepared. She was in the honors classes, so she was really good. Her English was perfect. She barely had an accent, but her Spanish was also wonderful. She hadn't lost it. And so that just tells you how smart she was. She didn't lose what she had. She just added on to it. And so she did apply for the job, and I was just so excited to see her, to see that she was doing well. And so that made me very proud of her.
I started my teaching career at a very small private school in Illinois. taught 7 different classes, so 2 math classes, 4 social studies classes, and a PE class. It was a lot. It was a lot of work, but it was, I think it made me a better planner, and so that helped me in that way. And then coming here to Broadview, this is the second school I've been at, and I absolutely love it. I love working with 8th grade, and if somebody's out there and they don't think that they would like working with middle school, give it a try, because I was definitely a high school all the way until I came here, and I don't know that I'll go back. I am drawn to kids who maybe aren't meeting their full potential, and I work hard with those kids to pull them to a place where they experience success, maybe for the first time in their educational experience, but I want to work with those kids to get them kind of addicted to success academically. The thing that gives me the most joy in teaching is seeing a student develop over the course of a year. So seeing a student being able to do things that they could not do in August. My kids teach mini lessons, and they are up on stage a lot, and we're constantly pushing them to read more complex texts. And so when a kid can do something independently, or they can plan an engaging lesson for their classmates that they just couldn't have done in August, that's the best. We also visit all the kids' homes in the summer before. So I use a couple weeks in August just to drive around the neighborhood and meet the different kids that are going to be in my classes. Because then they already know who I am, they already know my expectations, they already know that we're going to have a great year, they're going to learn a lot, and so they're already kind of on board on day one. But that also gets the parents on board, because they're like, oh, this person is willing to come to my house to talk with me. So I think we can have no stronger team than a student, parent, and teacher all together. The memory or experience that stands out most in my mind from my teaching career so far was I had a very, very difficult class, and I was inexperienced, and so it was a learning year. And so the class, it was one of those days where it just was not working. And so I talked to the class, and I was like, okay, if you are in with me, I need you over here, and we're just gonna work, and the rest of you, just be quiet. It was one of those days. And so when I did that, the class was still a little bit kind of off topic and not focused with me. And I was very, very frustrated. My principal walked in for my evaluation that day. I'm like, perfect, it's gotta be today. But the most powerful moment was this kid, I won't say his name, but he looked at me and he said, just teach me. And it has stuck with me ever since that moment, that you have kids in your room who are dying to learn. And even if the rest of the room just doesn't appear to be that way, there are kids who need us and who need a learning experience and who need an adult who's willing to invest in them. And so when he looked and he just said, just teach me. So he was like, I don't care about the rest of this room. And he wasn't the perfect kid, right? The next day he was whatever. But that day, he just said, just teach me. And it was the coolest moment, and it will stick with me forever.
I think what makes me a good teacher is, when I get a group of students in front of me at the beginning of the year, we set expectations for what they're going to achieve this year, but also what they're going to do in the future. And I try to take everything that we do in class and apply it to something that's going to help them in their life. It's not solving problems in class and then forgetting about it, but it's how can it help them in the future. And I think that any good teacher, myself included, you have to do those things, and you have to get students to realize how what they're learning in school is going to have an impact on their life. I think working with students that struggle, and then you see them work and you see them struggle with it and they get frustrated, and then all of a sudden things start to click. And when you see those students start to smile, the ones that have been struggling for days or weeks on a certain topic, and then all of a sudden their face lightens up and they start to smile and they start to enjoy their work because they finally understand it. I think that's one of the most enjoyable things as a teacher that I ever get to feel. Since coming back to teaching math a couple years ago, I would say one of the favorite lessons that we've had was with Pythagorean theorem. Last year we took students outside into the courtyard. We had ladders set up for them, and they had to be able to measure ladders and predict distances on a wall. We had little rockets that the students launched off, and we predicted the heights based on using the Pythagorean theorem. And it was very hands-on. It was very interactive for the students. And they got outside, and besides just loving blowing off the rockets, they had a great time, and they learned a lot, and they were able to take those lessons and apply them back into the classroom. So besides being a successful lesson, one of my favorite lessons, because we were hands-on, and we were doing things that the students had never done before and applying it to math. So a few years ago, I was teaching history or social studies in 8th grade. And I had a student that came to me at the beginning of the year, and they had always struggled with history, and it just wasn't one of their favorite topics. They didn't get why they had to learn it, and that student was very resistant all year long. And it didn't matter the type of lessons that we did, whether they were hands-on, whether they were projects, whether they were problem-based. It didn't matter what we did. The student just really had no desire to learn about history. And so one day I finally sat down and we started talking just one-to-one at lunch about history and why it's important and what it can do for you and how knowing history can have an impact. And over the course of the conversation, the student really started to understand why we push it. And I don't think that conversation was the complete difference maker, but from that day forward, there was a lot of engagement that the student had in the class. He started to really participate in class, and as a teacher, that was probably one of my proudest moments, is seeing a child that had no interest in what I was teaching, and it didn't matter what we taught, to becoming a child that by the end of the year didn't want to leave class. And anytime that you can get a kid that's not interested or even that isn't good at a subject, and you work with that kid long enough, and then all of a sudden they just don't want to leave your room, and they just want to learn more, and they want to do extra work. That's a great feeling. That's the impact and the change that I think all teachers want to have with their students.
I think I became a teacher because I realized that the world is only as clear as the words you have for it in your head. And during college, I realized I was figuring a lot out only because I had the language for it in my head, and I sort of watched that happen with preschoolers as they were learning just basic words, juice, lunch, nap time, and how much more relaxed and happier they were with everything after they knew those basics. So I sort of put all that together and realized I want everyone to be able to think clearly and understand their world, so they need the language for it. So that became a passion for teaching English. And then I also love art and expression and making things. So once we got an art program, that came in too. I think what makes my strongest teaching asset would be that I really do love reading and writing and art. Those are all things that I do at home in my spare time. They're things that I do during class when I have a minute. So I love what we're reading, and I love that they're reading, and their writing assignments to me seem fun or engaging. They push you, they're interesting. And everything that we do in art class, sometimes I'm jealous that they're working and I'm monitoring. So I think that enthusiasm and that actual love for what we're doing is what makes me a good teacher. I love when a kid walks in my room on the first day and tells me either I don't read, or I can't read, or I won't read, I'm not going to read, anything like that. And then by the end of the semester, because exams, it's half a day of work and then the rest is pretty boring, or you're waiting for your ride, that same student who walked in and said they wouldn't read asks to borrow the sequel to the last book that we read in class. So I get students who, on their first day, when it's time to read, they are extremely upset about it, or they're bored, or they don't believe me that they're going to do it. And by the end, they're like, oh, I don't want to do this writing assignment. Let's just read double today. So I love that. I guess people are always surprised to find out that I work here, because I'm like a tiny, young, white lady who's weird. So I think people think maybe I get walked on here. So people are surprised to find out that this works for me, that I do give and get and maintain respect, and that I do love it here. So I guess that's not very far-reaching from teaching, but that's something people are surprised to find, I think. I guess without using student names, I had a student who, taking English 1 for the first time, he was probably 15 and he extremely did not care. He was disengaged from the world and academics and work ethic, and none of it mattered to him at all. And I'm not exactly sure what happened over that summer. I think his grandmother's health started failing and he was just getting in more and more trouble, but he came back at 16 ready to go. And he hit the ground running. And we did English 1 together and we did English 2 together, and then we sent him to his homeschool. And we check on him now and then at his homeschool, and he's doing great. And the second he decided to work, he was vivacious and happy, and he was my favorite. And he was a terror the year before because he didn't care about anything, but he just makes me laugh so much. And even though it was probably 2 years ago, I'm still excited thinking that he's out there at his homeschool and that he turned it around and that we did it.
I think every teacher, or most teachers, will tell you that they became a teacher because they always knew they wanted to be a teacher. And I can say that that's true for me. Like, I knew my whole life this is what I wanted to do. I used my little stuffed animals in my grandma's living room and played teacher. But from the time I was in 2nd grade, I knew that this was it for me and this is what I wanted to do. And I don't necessarily know why. I think it's almost one of those natural, innate things that it just seems like this is the best fit for me, that this makes me happy. I think it's not just a profession for me, it's definitely part of me and what I do and what I give and also what I receive from kids. So I have to say that it's not just a job, a place I come. It's something that I think about all the time. I think about how to make it better. I think about what went wrong and what went right. So it's definitely just kind of a part of my personality, of what makes me me. What gives me the most joy or satisfaction in teaching is watching kids grow, watching them from how they change from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, how they learn to read, how they learn to think, how they learn to write, their interactions with me and other people. That bond, that personal connection that I make with kids, I think is really what makes teaching great. I tell them that they don't have to be perfect. You learn more from your mistakes than your successes. Go back. When you mess up, when you make a mistake, go back. You're going to learn more from what you got wrong than what you got right. But you also have to be a hard worker. You have to do all the things that you're told to do. Sometimes you have to do things you don't like to do, but you do. You have to do them. And I think that's how we prepare kids, is to make sure that they know that they're good, no matter if they're perfect or not perfect, and that hard work will eventually pay off. What makes me a good teacher is, I think it's what I always wanted to do. I think that I can't imagine myself doing anything else. This is it. This is me. This is what I love. I come here. I love to teach kids to read. I love to read books. I mean, who wouldn't want to be in elementary school? Think about that. You get to read good books. You learn new things every day. There's still recess and snack. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. This is a great place. I think one of the biggest highlights that I have or have had is those kids that come back. It doesn't matter if you see them at the store or you see them at the gas pump, but you see them 10 years later and they're like, Miss Farrell, and you're going, okay, I know you, and you're going through those thousands of names in your head, and you're like, yes, I remember you. And they go, do you remember the time that such and such happened, or I sharpened my pencil this big and you tried to throw it away, whatever. It's always some funny story that you think didn't really It was just an average day, but to them, it meant something.
I guess the biggest reason I became a teacher was because I spent some time in college working with kids. Worked at a Y, spent some time coaching and mentoring kids. Wanted to be a politician, was a poli-sci psychology major. Wanted to be a politician, decided that after working with kids, that didn't seem like the right thing to do, wasn't quite as rewarding. So decided I want to be a teacher, spent some time at a private school environment, and then that led me into the public school role of being a teacher. For me, being a teacher is being a mentor. I spend more time, I think, developing relationships with kids, and then I try to teach them the content and the curriculum. But those relationships I make with kids last forever. I still talk to kids, and like we all do, that we've taught 15 years ago. But that's really what it's about for me, is mentoring, helping kids grow, being in their lives when they need it the most. I think I try to do a whole lot of deep thinking, higher level thinking with them. I think we spend a lot of time in schools where they do rote things. They memorize, or they do application, but on a really low level. I want the kids to spend time thinking, because if I can get them to do that, now again, that's not every day, but if I can get them to do that once or twice a week, if I can get them to really process information, go home and dig, I'm preparing them for life, because they're gonna fall down, they're gonna have challenges. And if they can realize that if they think it through, we use embrace the struggle in my room. Like, if you didn't get it, embrace the struggle. Like, understand you're gonna struggle, embrace it, love it, you're gonna grow from it. And if I can get them thinking, then I can get them involved in that process. That's what I want them to do. I want them to be successful because they can think properly and they can get through a struggle. They can go through some tough times. I guess the best moment for me, and it really is, it was a happenstance. I taught at Southern High School for 9 years, and I taught a whole bunch of clientele. And all my kids, as I grew older, would start coming back. But there was this young man who went into the military, and he had been involved with drugs and alcohol. He had done some things where he had considered dropping out. I knew that I was influential, but I don't think I knew how influential I was. I lost track of him. He ends up going to the military. He comes home from about 2 years maybe in, and shows up at Southern High School, and I'm not there because I had come to Western. He drove from Southern High School to Western that afternoon and waited till school was out, came in my classroom, and wanted me to meet his child. He had had a kid, he got married, he wanted me to meet his wife, he wanted me to meet his child. And it was one of those moments where I was kind of in a hurry to get out of school, and we have those conversations with kids sometimes where it has those awkward moments because we just haven't seen them in so long. But it was a conversation that I wanted to have for an hour. It never stopped. We caught up, and he thanked me for what I had done for him, and quite frankly, I thanked him for coming back and letting me know that I had made a difference. So, and it was kind of cool to hold the baby and do that as well. So that's probably the most powerful moment I've had.